G'day and welcome back to Indefensible New Zealand, the third episode of the 2024 season, and today it's Waitangi Day. That's the New Zealand national holiday, for want of a better term, if you're not familiar with it. So 6 February, and I thought it was a good time to actually talk about national security in the context of people. We know that the Defence Force is pretty light on people at the moment. We know that New Zealand is struggling with social unity at many different levels, and those two things actually collide. And so I want to just address that. What prompted me to, several things prompted me actually to do this episode today. One is, I guess, a reflection on what it means for most people, and the comments that I've heard from my friends and that around the town. I'm sitting on the back of the boat in Havelock Marina in the Marlborough Sounds, by the way. The general comment that most people have made is, means nothing to me. It's a nothing day. It's just a day for grievance and appeasement of one particular sector, Māori. I was struck with just how pervasive that attitude is, that this is a nothing day, when I've been all over the world and been in many countries and celebrated their national days, and it's just in every case it's just such a fantastic celebration of their culture and their country. And I guess the over the top end is July the 4th in the United States. I've been in Canada on July the 1st, and that's a fantastic celebration. France on Bastille Day, July the 14th, and so on and so forth. Australia Day. So I went online to have a look, because all the media coverage is about what's happening at Waitangi itself. We've got the politicians there and Māoridom and the Navy, etc., etc. So I searched for other events that are happening on Waitangi Day in New Zealand, and it's pretty slim pickings. I have to say, big ups to Waikato. You seem to have the idea, and a big series of multicultural events, food and shows and all that sort of thing. And really, that's what I hoped that a New Zealand National Day might well become. I think right at the moment we have to ask ourselves whether a small group has captured this day and it's become a day of grievance and appeasement rather than a day of celebration of our nation. And look, as we know from wars gone by, appeasement means hoping the crocodile will eat you last. So what does this have to do with national security? Well, as I alluded to at the start, the social fabric is what we exist to defend in the national security scene. And so what fabric? There are undoubtedly a silent mass. There's undoubtedly a silent mass in New Zealand that is sort of trucking along and basically ignoring what is going on in society, or silently unhappy. There's no doubt a small group, and I would say it is a very small group, who will not be happy until some sort of complete co-governance, dual governance, or secession is achieved. And then what? I mean, what are we talking about here? A Gaza Strip kind of set up with a road corridor to a West Bank? I can't see it ever being a viable alternative here in New Zealand. But everyone's voice is valid. However, that small number of voices seems to be dominating the discussion about what and who we are as a nation and where we should be headed, and I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's helpful for the country. What do you do about it? That is a very complex problem. Let's just look at the Defence Force and the makeup of the Defence Force for a moment. And I was really quite struck with an article published on LinkedIn a couple of days ago by a former Army colleague of mine, Tim Keating, who was the Chief of the Defence Force and now working offshore. And he wrote a very compelling piece. I recommend you go and have a look at it if you've got a couple of minutes. Talking about his time, he was reflecting on Waitangi Day and talking about his time as the commander of the provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan. And Hamid Karzai, the Afghan president at the time, came and he was welcomed with a pofuli, etc. And during a speech, he set aside his speech notes and he looked at the New Zealand contingent and said, "This is my vision for Afghanistan, that all these cultures, races, religions, all together operating as one, respectful of each other's background and position, but working together. Sadly, his vision, as Tim points out, didn't come to fruition, but I think it is a worthwhile one. I think actually most New Zealanders would agree that that's the vision that they want for New Zealand as well. So, if the New Zealand Defence Force is a clear working model of how multiculturalism can work, then why not embrace that as the centre of excellence? And I've advocated for some time, for instance, that we need a much bigger defence force. Well, we can't even crew the one we've got at the moment, but that's actually reasonably solvable. And no, I'm not talking about conscription or national service, and I'm not talking about boot camps for serial youth offenders. I think it's a dumb idea. I've published on that. But I am talking about smoothing the channels, the pathways, and making it much easier for many, many more people to engage with the arms and services of state and find their way to our flag and our national anthem. And that becomes more important as more and more New Zealanders arrive. You know, we're talking about a quarter of the country now not born here. So what are some of the ideas? Well, you can go onto the unclas.com website, and most of them are there and are published extensively over the last 5 or 6 years on it. Voluntary national service is a no-brainer to me. I don't think compulsory anything fits well with New Zealand, but voluntary does. And just imagine a situation where people could enrol full-time or part-time into the arms and services, not just the Defence Force, but primarily I think that's the area where we've got the capacity at the moment. And in return, gain not only the benefit of actually being part of that machine, but also perhaps write off student loans, get other first home starts, etc., etc. So I call this policy of coordinated self-interest, and that's self-explanatory. We've got to find ways with new generations of finding the meeting point between what it is they desire and what it is we need to do to continue to function as a country. So I think voluntary national service across defence, police, fire, civil defence is a no-brainer. I think we've got to recognise the gig economy and understand that people aren't going to join the Defence Force for their whole career. Many want to try it out. But look, shorter contracts, incentives to re-enlist, choose your NCO corps and your senior officer corps from that group, rather than try and select them when they're all 17, 18, 19 years old and try and work out what they're going to be like in 10 or 20 years. One of the many barriers to entry for the Defence Force is if you have a criminal record. Now, there's a whole lot of people, mostly young men, and unfortunately the statistics show a lot of young Māori men have convictions that stop them from getting into the Defence Force. I think we need to go and re-examine those rules and have some overrides, some common sense applied. Someone who does something dumb when they're 17 or 18 isn't necessarily going to be doing the same things in their 20s or 30s, and I think that we're losing a lot of potentially good soldiers, sailors and airmen because of that. Likewise, health, medical, there's a whole range of criteria. This idea that you've got to be able to pass the aptitude test 2 goes or you can never apply again, dumb. What we should be doing is finding those people who are obviously interested and getting them into a coaching mentoring scheme where they can actually pass the aptitude test, put them into a gamified setting rather than a traditional examination setting. All sorts of things we can do to improve the breadth of intake and the depth of intake, and we haven't really got very much time. If you look at my priorities for building the Defence Force is firstly people. We lack mass. And we've got to find a whole lot of ways, and we've got to use fast fail techniques to try and get in as many as possible in the shortest possible time. It won't all be perfect, some of it will be ugly, but we can work that out. Secondly, we need to be able to protect those people, so decent equipment, decent vehicles, and reconnaissance, intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, protective systems and so on. Thirdly, we need to be able to project those people. There's no point having a brilliant defence force that can only sit in Linton or Waiuru. And finally, we need to be able to sustain it, which means we need the over-the-water logistics capability to sustain a force that is somewhere else. Now that's a pretty quick flyby, and you might think, well, it's an interesting conflation between Waitangi Day and the Defence Force's personnel issues. But actually, there is a there is a common thread there, and that is that if we can't appeal to the mass of people in the for the Defence Force's recruitment purposes, how on earth are we ever going to find some sort of common ground or basis for binding together the broader population, the broader society of New Zealand? So I think, looping back to Waitangi Day, I'd like to see a real effort by the government, central and local, and community groups to actually have a national celebration around the country, to stop this fixation on Waitangi, move grievances to where they should be heard, which is Parliament, and by all means go to Waitangi, the treaty grounds, and have a celebration of the signing for those that signed it. But this media coverage of continual angst and some of the sensational headlines that I've seen over the last few days is quite simply unhelpful, and in many cases untrue. So let's do better, New Zealand. Let's get up there and have people talking about the amazing experience they had when they came to New Zealand on their National Day, 6th of February. Send any questions for the podcast if you've got any, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.